Okay, Grandpa, why don't you go ahead and start with your history?
Uh,
You were born?
I'm Alvas John Frankman, Sr., born February the 17th, 1901, in a little farming community known as Oak Hill, Arkansas, about 10 miles north of Eureka Springs, the city of Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Our family consisted of my father, John Henry Frankman, and my mother was Lena Darkus Clark. They were married in 1900, April 1900, and our family consisted of my father and mother and 3 children. My sister Mako Frankman and myself, Alvas John Frankman Sr., and my brother Clint Jasper Frankman. And we lived in a 3-room log house, and it was out in the country, and our water was carried from a spring of fresh water, and the house was heated by fireplaces, and we had a wood cook stove, and my mother did her cooking there, and after we'd been living there in 1904, it was March the 30th, 1904, my father had a tooth extracted and died from gangrene poison, and left my mother and us without a father. And so
Can you tell me a little bit about your father?
my father was born in Germany, and he was one of about 8 children, and he was born June the 6th, 1843, and came with his parents to America when he was 10 years old, and they settled in Wisconsin. And there he decided, was the war broke out, and he was 18 years old, and the Civil War was starting, and he wanted to join and be a soldier in the Civil War, but had to be 21, but he told him he was 21, which he was only 18, but he said he was 21 in order to, because he was large for his age. So he served during the Civil War 3 years, and while in the service in the war of Civil War, they were down in the state of North Carolina pushing those Confederate soldiers out, and everything. And he was in the front lines, and these Confederates captured him and took him a prisoner and had him locked up, and he didn't get much to eat there, so he had to take kind of lean pickings, but he was there till the war ended and so after the war was ended, he was released and sent back to the state of Wisconsin, and was discharged. And he, by the way, he had he was a lot older than my mother, and he had a family of 9 children, and raised all of them. And in 1900, he he moved from South Dakota after his wife died, and he settled and came down into Arkansas, and that's where he met my mother in 1900, and they were married. And then's when we moved out. He had this little farm out there in the north of the city of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, in a little farming community known as Oak Hill, Arkansas. And it was a log house, about 3 rooms, and they had a fireplace for heating, had a cook stove to cook on, and they carried the water from a freshwater spring. And I can remember there was a lot of big snakes around there, and one was trying to swallow a frog, and the frog was yelling at the top of his voice, and I was only about 4 years, and I run home to my mother saying the snake's calling me, and I don't want to go to him, and I was scared. But I realized when I got older, the frog was in his mouth, and he was trying to get out, but the snake had him and swallowed him alive. And after about 3 years there, my father had a tooth extracted and got gangrene poison and died March the 30th, 1904, and was buried in a little cemetery about 3 miles from our home known as Oak Hill Cemetery. And after about 3 years, as a widow woman with 3 children, my mother, which, by the way, she got a pension because my father was a veteran of the Civil War. So anyway, she got a pension for us children. And about 3 years after my father's death, she remarried to a Mr. William Burton, and they moved from this Oak Hill farming community. They sold out there and moved to Delaware County, Oklahoma, on a farm way out there, no schools, and Indians were a lot of Indians around, and nighttime they'd hold these dances and carry on, holler, and you could hear them for miles away. And
how close were they to your home?
About a quarter of a mile from our home, this is where they held their dances. They really made a lot of noise.
Were you guys scared, or?
I was kind of half scared. I know Mother sent me out to get some dry branches to make kindling wood to start the fire, and I seen an Indian, and I ran home as fast as I could. And so we lived there that year in Oklahoma on this farm, and my mother wanted to have school for us, so she put us on the train and moved us back to Arkansas, to the city of Fayetteville.
What did you think about the train ride? Was that your first train ride?
Yeah, that was first train ride, and it was pretty nice. I think I got off and I got back on the wrong car, and they thought they'd lost me for a minute. And anyway, we got to Fayetteville, and Mother had 2 small homes there. She rented one out and lived in one, and sent us to school. Of course, I was a country kid, and these this mean city kid who wanted to bully us, you know. And one day we was coming home from school. My brother Clint and I was walking home from school, and here comes some rocks flying by us, and we looked, and this kid was throwing rocks at us. And I ran and got behind the telephone pole, and he chased Clint and run past me, and he ran up to, and so by that time I had a lot of rocks myself, and I was a good rock thrower, and I started letting him have it. You know, I was throwing rocks at him, and Clint got rocks, and so between the two of us, we had him on the run, and we chased him all the way home. And I was throwing rocks, and the rocks was flying all around him, and he ran into this little barn, and the rock hit about 3 feet above his head, and you could hear the board, you know. And so that kid, he gave me a lot of respect after that. He never picked on me anymore, because I was a better rock thrower than he was.
Do you want me to stop so you can get some water?
I'm all right.
Okay.
And so we was living out there in the country in Oklahoma, and had moved back to Fayetteville. Was only there 1 year in Fayetteville.
Do you want me to get you some water, Grandpa?
And
Go ahead, you're recording again.
in Fayetteville, we'd gone to school that year, and the school term was out, and it was summertime. My mother wanted to move out in the country near her sister, so we moved out on a vacant home out there in the country, and lived there during the summer. And my aunts and uncles came and visited us, and they went down into the river bottom land and got a farmer had a lot of watermelons, and we got a whole wagon load of watermelons. And they didn't cost much. And on the way back, we stopped at this little country store, and there was a huge watermelon, so big it was on display. And my uncle said, "How much you want for the watermelon?" He said, 5 cents, 1 nickel. And they gave him a nickel and took the big watermelon. We had a big trough full of cold water and put all these watermelons in there. And we had a watermelon bust lasted for days. And so anyway, there in Arkansas, that fall, my stepfather came from Oklahoma, and mother and him decided to move back to Oklahoma, and they moved from Arkansas in the country there. They moved back to Oklahoma in the state of Oklahoma, in the county of Creek County, Oklahoma, and we lived there that 1 year, and it was way out in the country. And the people that had these wild Texas steers, but there was cattlemen, and they had a big fence around a huge several hundred acres or 1,000 acres maybe, and it had lots of grass down there in Oklahoma. So they'd fatten those big steers up before they butchered them. But they were wild, and we'd go through there on a wagon, and those old big old tall steers, and they had horns, long horns, and they'd kind of walk around their wagon out ways. They didn't attack us or anything in the wagon.
You got gouged or anything like that with those horns?
No, I didn't. One little boy got killed by one of them, gored. And they had to shoot the steer to get rid of it, to get the boy off. And there was lots of wolves and coyotes there. And when the sun would go down, it was hot during the day, but when the sun went down, those wolves would all start barking, and we had a big black dog, and they'd come, Woods would come up to the house, and he'd chase them away, and then they'd chase him back, and the whole pack after him, and he'd run into the house. And so those wolves, you could hear them all over, and it was the big wolves, you could hear them barking, and you hear the little coyotes too, you know. But we stayed there that year, and then that fall we moved back to Delaware County, Oklahoma, on a farm. First we moved into a little house there, and it was way out in the country, of course, and they had to carry water from the neighbor's spring. They'd gone to get water, and the kerosene lamp went out, and I started singing. The lamp went out, and they didn't know what it was all about, and they heard me. And my stepfather ran back to see, thought maybe the house was on fire or something. And he come panting, and he said, "What's your noise about, or what are you calling? What do you want? What's the matter?" And I said, "The light went out." He said, "Well, you keep still about the light going out." I was kind of scared, you know, in the dark, and the cattle was all running around there too. So we moved in, after these people moved out of the better home, we rented the whole place, and we moved in the other house. But it had bed bugs in the walls, and they'd come out at night and get in your bed and bite you, you know, or suck your blood, I guess. And and Mother had quite a time getting rid of them, on this bed bugs. And she had an iron bedstead we were sleeping on, but she'd put pie pans down with kerosene in it. But those things, they got up on the ceiling and dropped down. And we had an awful time with them. Finally, Mother went and got a lot of sulfur and made a fire and burnt this sulfur and had the doors and windows all closed real tight. And that smoke, sulfur, killed all the bed bugs.
Wow.
So
Did your house stink?
no, I didn't notice them. And they raised corn and stuff, and also we had to get the bedding. We had these dryland geese, big geese, and they had lots of feathers. In the summer we'd pluck the feathers off, pick the feathers off of them.
When they were still alive?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
And then during the summer they'd shed anyway,
Uh-huh.
and pull the feathers out. They'd come out pretty easy. But they didn't like that. They'd squawk and yell. But they'd hold them and pick the small feathers off, you know. And then that was be in the summer, and it was hot, warm, and then by winter time the new feathers had grown back. And they made feather bed tickings. They didn't have mattresses. We got this ticking and made a big size of the bed and filled it full of straw, and then we put this, and we did the same with the feathers. We made a ticking and had a feather bed on top of the straw ticking bed, and we slept in, and that was real warm in the wintertime, in a feather bed. And we lived there, and then we moved 2 or 3 times. We moved back up near where there was a school in Oklahoma there, in Delaware County. So we'd have school, and I had a little country school we went to.
How many years of school did you go to?
All 2 or 3 years. A lot of one year we just had 3 months schooling, and then it got a little longer, and I didn't get much schooling, and I didn't take a lot of interest in it either. It was too mischievous. And January the 1916, my mother had a baby, and she died of childbirth about a week after the baby was born. Poison set in, and the doctors didn't know what to do. You know, they weren't good doctors. And she died. And
Did
left,
the baby live?
yeah, the baby's still alive. We got a half sister in Oklahoma.
And her name is?
Gracie Roberts by marriage. And she lives in Oklahoma. And she's a widow woman. And they had 3 or 4 children.
What happened after your mom died?
After Mom died, well, after Mom died, we didn't want to live with a stepfather, so, and we had a little money, and the livestock went to belong to my brother and I, because we was the children of our father, and it was his money had bought it. So, but when my father died, we went to the county courthouse and see who would be the guardian over us. And so we chose our Haggard, and his wife was an older cousin of ours, and we lived with them.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Beg pardon?
I was going to ask you now, who is Uncle Joe?
Oh, Uncle Joe, that's Will Burton's, my stepfather's father. He'd be a grandfather.
Step-grandfather.
Yeah, step-grandfather. And he used to hunt bees, and I'd go out with him. It's quite interesting. He had this bait the bees would work on. They'd come down and get the stuff they make their honey out of and fly away, and he'd see the way they go, and he'd keep moving that bait the way they went, you see. And after several moves, he'd get maybe close enough he could see where the tree was, and those trees were hollow. The birds, they had a big woodchuck, they called him, a woodpecker. He could peck a hole through a hard oak wood. He'd peck a hole, and the tree rotted from the inside, and it got decayed from the inside because the worms got in there, I guess. And the birds peck a hole in there and get in there and eat those worms and dig it out, you know. And they had a big hollow tree, and then the bees had, when the bees ever so often they had a new hive, they'd leave and they'd have, when the bees had young ones, and then the old ones, I think it was, that flew away, and because they couldn't have 2 queens in the same hive. And so there was quite a lot of bee trees around, hollow trees for them to, and we'd get those and cut those trees down and get all that honey, and there's in the combs, you know, have a big tub full of honey on it. And then make a little thing to put, what they call it, where they put the honey bees in. We set that right on the log where they were, and they'd crawl up in there. It was called a beehive. And so we'd have the bees, and we could take them back to our home and have bees there. And so.
Can you tell a story about a guilty conscience?
Oh, my mother, you know, she was very strict, you know, with us. And when 2 things happened. When I was going to school there, and on Sunday we'd go to Sunday school and we'd play with Frankie Haggard. He didn't like his folks didn't like the neighbors, and their names were Fields. Frankie Haggard's parents would talk about him, and we were playing around. It's getting almost dark. And he said, "Well, let's get some rocks and throw it at that Mrs. Fields. They're bad people. My folks don't like them." And so, okay, we go out and get some rocks, and the window was open, and she had a kerosene lamp, and she's sitting in there reading, and we pegged rocks in there, and one of them hit her on the arm. And so of course we'd hide out so she couldn't find us. and my cousins, my aunt heard about it, and she came over to visit my mother, and I'm just a kid sitting there listening, and she started telling about this incident of kids throwing rocks at Mrs. Fields. And my brother and I both was involved in it, and we both had white shirts, and Aunt Eva, the aunt's just telling all about it, and I knew I was in trouble there. So she said, when she said one of them had on a white shirt, I thought first thing, well, maybe they think Clint did and I didn't. So I said, I didn't throw any rocks. She looked at me, she says, a guilty conscience needs no accuser. Well, I didn't have any answer for that, so I kept quiet then. And my mother said, well, after she left, says, next Sunday, if we go to Sunday school, you're going to go in, you two boys, and tell Mrs. Fields you're sorry. So the next Sunday, I liked to stay home, but I couldn't do it because they just go to Sunday school. On the way to Sunday school, stopped at Mrs. Fields, and she had us two kids stand up and tell her, Mrs. Fields was sorry we threw rocks at her. And so we didn't do that anymore.
Now, tell me about when your mom converted to, she wasn't religious until she converted to
Well,
different...
she didn't belong to any church. Yeah, there was revival. This old couple, man and wife, he was a preacher, you know. And they came down there, and there was a stream of water called Spavinaw Creek. And he took, and there's sawmills around there, small sawmills. And he got a lot of sawdust and put down on the ground. It was dry and dusty, you know. So he covered it all with sawdust, the whole area there. And then he got poles and put them up about 8-9 feet off the ground. And then he cut a lot of brush and made a shady brush arbor, you know, you call it. And all those leaves, and so you'd be in the shade there, out of the sun. And then he preached after dark. He had kerosene lamps hanging here and there, you know. And he'd preach, and to get converts, you see. And then they'd say they'd had a mourner's bench, had a bench made. And he'd made a lot of benches out of rough lumber so it'd have something to sit on, you know. So, but it come up on this stand. It was on boards up off higher in the sawdust, and kneel down up there if you'd like to come to the mourner's bench, and we'd all pray for you. And I got up there one time, and they all started praying, "Yea, I'm a sinner, Lord, give me, I pray." And they went on. They sound terrible to me, you know, and I didn't want any of that. So the rest of them got baptized. My mother and my stepfather and Mako and Clint were all baptized. Mm-hmm. And mother became very religious, and they'd have prayer meeting in the little school in the Sunday evenings, and Mom would bear her testimony. It was kind of like bearing testimony. And so and also before we go to bed at night, she'd read the Bible to us, and she'd get us to go to bed, my brother and I, as kids, and she'd kneel down by the bed and say a prayer, a night's prayer, you know. So she kind of taught us to be religious too, you know. But after she died, I was kind of a restless kid, you know.
Yeah, now you were talking about how you and Clint chose to have an aunt or a cousin be your guardian.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, that's what happened then. Theodore Haggard his wife was my first cousin. They were older, of course, and we stayed with him, and he was a guardian. And I did a lot of things, and he finally just shipped me out here to Auburn, Washington, because Mako was living out here with my aunt, Aunt Ada. So anyway, I did quite a lot of things just mischievous, like go and open had a corral that was around the barn, had all these little yearling calves in there. I'd go up and ride up on the horse and open the gate, and then they'd all run out and go off in the pastures. and this fellow's name was Mr. Wilkes. So he told Theodore Haggard that what I did, and I denied it. He said, well, I'm going to take you over there and you got to tell them. And I got up and I said, I denied I did it, which I was not lying, And so I was a pretty ornery kid, stole watermelons and did different things that shouldn't have did, I guess. But the watermelons were plentiful and nobody cared anyway. And
why didn't you choose to stay with your stepfather and have him as your guardian?
well, we didn't care for him that much.
So, then your guardian?
He was just a stepfather, and we didn't. We decided to go with the realities. And
so they shipped you up to Auburn. Did you take the train, or?
Yeah, we took a train. We got on. He took us over to town about 15 miles from where we were living. We got on this train.
How old were you?
I was about 16 then, I guess.
And Clint was how old?
Or 15. He's 2 years younger. So he got tickets for us, put us on the train. The train went to Kansas City, Missouri, and the big Union depot there. And we had to lay over there quite a while for the next train to take us on. So we'd walk and look out on the streets, and the automobiles running around, and we were just country kids. And I said, no, we better not go out there. We can never find our way back here. And we stayed there, and it was kind of restless. Finally, the train came to load, and this guy had red caps to help you with your baggage. So he grabbed our suitcases and carried them on. And he tells us so he doesn't get paid, just whatever we paid him. So we didn't have hardly any money, but we give him 50 cents or something like that. Mm-hmm. And this young couple sitting right in front of us, they looked around and said, you boys must have money to pay that red cab guy. He gets paid. He's getting paid for doing this. You didn't need to give him money. He said, you must have a lot of money.
Oh no.
So we went on, got on the train, and then by mistake this conductor let us off at Pendleton, Oregon. And we laid over there, and these Indian women with their bright blankets around them, come in there, the depot, and stand around and look. And we laid over there, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 hours, and they put us on the train. And then we got, that was last, we went to Portland and that went from Pendleton to Portland and got off there at Portland in the depot. We was waiting there, and I was restless, and I'd go up and say, when's the train going to be here? And he'd tell me. Pretty soon 15 minutes so I back asked him the same question. After 2 or 3 times, he says, I've told you 3 or 4 times now. He said, don't bother me anymore. So we got on the train there at Portland, then got off here in Auburn. Mm-hmm. And that's when I had my first train ride, Clint and I. They didn't have taxis then. This one woman had an old automobile. She called it a jitney, and her name was Williams, Mrs. Williams Jitney, and she'd drive you out for a small fee, So my Aunt Makel and them was living out there on Stuck River, in a farm out there, and it's about 2 or 3 miles out of downtown from her depot. So she drove us out there, and so we lived with her, and then Mako and Steve got married and got another house, and so we moved in with them. But I was working in the railroad, moving the freight. They had a freight where they transferred from one boxcar to the other, and it was a transfer shed. And then I worked in the roundhouse with these engines where I had to put coal in the, you just run it at train, or run the train up to the, and stopped it under the hoppers and pull the thing and fill the engine. Had a big thing almost like a boxcar, half size of a boxcar, that they filled that with coal. And then we had to put water in too, and then we had sand, and they had sand. They had a thing that you could put sand in this hopper, and it had a little valve, and going over the mountain, the wheels would start to spin. The engineer could release some of that sand. It would come down right in front of the wheels, and the sand, the grit of the sand would give them better traction.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that's the way they got over the mountains. Otherwise, the wheels started spinning because they had pulled a whole long train of boxcars, and they had to have that sand down there to keep the wheels. So I'd do that. Then I worked in the shipyards a while, and then I went back and worked in the railroads again. And then after I'd worked in the railroads, I went and decided I was going to the picture shows, seeing all these military men parading, and everybody was waving at them. They're like heroes, I thought, boy, I think I'll do that too. So I went in Seattle and found the recruiting office for the Marines, and enlisted in the Marine Corps.
Yeah, how old were you when you enlisted?
Let me see, I was 18 then. See, I was 18 in February, and this was May when I joined. So I went in there, I think, joined.
Was that before World War?
That was still World War I, too, or World War One. World War One, yeah. It wasn't over. They'd kind of stopped an armistice, but peace hadn't been officially declared. So I went, joined there, and they had to take my basic training in Mary Island, California. That's a neck of water run way up there to Mary Island. It was an island, and salt water, and this channel came up there, and we could take the ferry boat. So anyway, we came by train and got off there at Vallejo and went over and reported in. And they had a soldier with us, new recruits, you see, in charge of us. And so we went into basic training, and they issued you uniform clothing, and you discarded your civilian clothes. And then you was a Marine, but just a recruit. You had to serve 3 months, I think it was. And he just give us all kinds of athletic stuff. He'd run us, the old sergeant would run us clear around the island, and he'd say, on your toes, and he'd run us around and around, and 3 or 4 miles, I guess. Just trotting as fast as you can, And then he'd get you back in the parade grounds there, and he'd make us do stoop falling. You get down. I was pretty husky then, I guess. I couldn't do it now, but you stoop falling. You know what that is?
I don't.
You lay down flat on the thing, and you put your arms out, and your toes way back full length, And you stand on your toes. You're laying on your toes, and you push yourself up with your arms, up and down. You raise yourself up. You understand what I mean?
Uh-huh. Kind of like a push-up?
Push-ups, yeah, they call it. And we do that, and we had gymnasium where we took a lot of stuff too, And we had us in physical good health, that was giving us more muscle. He was building us up, you know.
Uh-huh.
So at the end of the 3 months, then I started doing guard duty there in Mare Island. And they're building a California battleship there. And they had a ferry boat to run across, or just a channel about a quarter of a mile or half a mile across, you know. And these workers had come on that boat and ride over and ride back on it, you see. And some of them, when the boat, before it got really good and docked, 2 or 3 feet or 4 feet, some of them would jump off, you know. So that they stopped that. They had a chain up there and had a Marine guard there, and I was a Marine guard on that.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't, those workers, they didn't dare to move because I was a big tough Marine out there with a 45 on the hip. And so I watched and wait till it fully docked, and then I'd drop that chain and they'd run like a bunch of wild cattle to get off, you know.
Uh-huh.
And then part of the time I'd stand guard over on the city side. They had a little sentry box there, and my duty there was to they had to have a badge showing that they really belonged as and working in the Navy Yard. They had to show that badge to me. As I looked at it, they couldn't go by me till they showed me the badge, and then I'd let them on there. And another guy was on there to handle the chain, of course, and I stand guard on that. And they gave me a 45, and I took it all apart there one time, because I was standing out there, nothing to do, because the only time they need you is when the ferry boat came. And it was kind of nice. So it was about 3 months there on that, and then they transferred us up here to Mare Island, to Bremen Navy Yard. Went up to Bremen Navy Yard, and I stood guard in the Navy Yard. And
when did you go to Panama?
Panama. Well, after I'd served about 2 years, I went aboard. I had told them I'd like to serve on the ship for the rest of my enlistment. So they transferred me over on the battleship Mississippi. And that's when they made the cruise down to Panama and around South America. And
what's that story about your shipmates getting you off in, where was it, Mexico? Or?
oh yeah, well, so when we was on the ship, you know, we anchored there in San Diego, and that's about 30 miles bus run into Tijuana, Mexico. These guys all like to drink, and they knew I didn't drink, so they was determined to get me drunk.
Uh-huh.
So they'd say, "Let's go, come on, Frankman, let's go to Tijuana." And I remember, and they was getting me to drink, and there's beer, I guess, and liquor too, and I was about to pass out, I guess. But this guy hauling these drinks, it had a truck, you know, and they had these bottles all in a case, you know, and he was unloading them, and I come up and I said, "Here, I'll help you," and I'd pick them up, and instead of bending over, I'd drop them. And he was hauling, this old Mexican hauling, "No, no, 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 no." I guess when I dropped them, some of them would break, you know. And I was just so near passed out. So what they did, some of these other Marines got me on the bus, you know, and I was completely sacked out, didn't know, I couldn't take that alcohol and stuff. That's the first time I'd ever had. So I'm sound asleep. And they got back to San Diego, they dropped me off there on the street, and I guess I was laying there drunk, you know. And the police come along and put me locked me up in the cell so I could sleep it off. And when I woke up, I seen I was in jail, and I said, this is, Anyway, I was in jail, and I looked. You going to record this?
You betcha. This is a great story. I love it.
And so I woke up and I said to myself, well, those Mexicans has got me locked up here in their jail in Mexico. Well, boy, I says, I'm going to make a fuss about this. And about that time, I was wondering what to do. Here come the shore patrol from, and here I didn't know where it was, and I was back in San Diego in the jail. And so they took me back aboard ship and just turned me loose, and that was all it was to it. But I never got drunk. But they laughed and kidded me about that as long as I was around those guys. They thought they'd done something big, you know. Anyway, that was so. After about a month before us, then we cruised clear down around South America and back up, and we stopped down there, and you know that place there where a neck they call Baja, California, where it's a neck of water runs up in one piece of land. But we pulled in there and stopped, and these natives come out in their rowboats and stopped there for, I think it was very long, and then so those officers just like to have a good time, no hurry about getting down to Panama. So we went there, and I was a guard on they had a brig, they called it, where they had a bunch of cells to lock these prisoners up, the ones that deserted or did something to put them on bread and water if they weren't behaving properly. So I was a guard, and I went down to Panama, but I had time off too, and I went around Panama and checked and seen what didn't impress me too much. Panama didn't. Anyway, we was out on the beach, and one day they was going to take a bunch of us over on this island to go swimming, you know. And here they had me on guard duty, and I wanted to go for the worst. I wanted to go so bad, but I had guard duty, and I didn't get to go. And you know, they went swimming out there, and some of them are drowned. It was undercurrents out there around those little islands, and 2 or 3 of them got drowned. I might have got drowned if it hadn't been a me.
Wow, what a
guard.
blessing.
Yeah. And these in Panama, there's a lot of liquor there, and they get drunk. And these guys in Panama, sailors, all drunk, you know. And they had a big tugboat would haul us back to our ships from shore, from the docks, you know. And we'd get on that show, and this drunken sailor, he's wanting to fight, you know. He wanted to fight anybody. Hey, you Marine up there, come down here, I'll knock the hell out of you. And he's swearing around. Nobody's paying him any attention. They know he's drunk. And one of the crewmen, so one of the sailors that manned the lines and everything when he had certain things to do. And he walked by this guy, and this sailor was on the part of the crew that run the tugboat, walked by this loudmouth that was drunk and wanted to fight, and this guy says, "Hey, you," and jerked the guy around, and this guy hit him on the chin and knocked him completely out. He just went over like a ton of bricks. The sailor was strong. He picked the wrong guy. That took all the fight out of him. He laid down there completely out and come to. I guess that was enough of that for him. Yeah. So we was there in Panama quite a while, and we came back up here to Seattle too. We was here in Seattle too, and Clinton and my cousin Clifton's sister and them, they came visit me aboard the ship there.
Did they think that was pretty impressive that you were
Yeah.
a Marine?
Oh yeah, I was quite a man. I showed them around my uniform. They had to be escorted around too, and so it was interesting. But when the time was just almost up, we back down there to San Pedro. That's the harbor for Los Angeles, and they had a chart. What do you call it? The ones that go underwater, submarine base. It was a submarine base, and so in this submarine base, we're just waiting there for discharge. So come today, May the 7th, I was discharged. That
What
was
year, do you know?
1923. I'd served my 4 years then. So they discharged me. But here's what happened. My discharge was locked up in the desk there, and the guy that had the key was gone on leave. And the lieutenant said to me, he said, "Well, would you like to stay here till another day or so?" I says, "No, I want my discharge. I demand it,
Mm-hmm.
And he went and got some screwdrivers and a hammer and broke the thing open and got my discharge out.
They didn't want to let you go, huh?
Well, he didn't want to break open the thing. He had to break open the drawer that was locked.
Almost didn't get out of the Marine.
But, I'd served my time,
Mm-hmm.
so I had a right to demand my discharge. He asked me if I'd wait, and I said, "No, I want my discharge now. I want to get off of here and go," which I did.
What'd you do after you got discharged?
Well, before I was discharged, someone was talking about one of the other fellows who got discharged, and he was working in this sheet metal shop, making $1 an hour. And here I was working for $30 a month. I thought, gee, that's big bucks from me. I could get that. Of course, I was not a mechanic then. And so as soon as I got back, I went to this there's a big sheet metal shop. They did large contracts and stuff. So I went down there, and the guy, the superintendent, said, "Well, you look pretty husky." He said, "Okay." He says, "You want to go to work?" So they just made me a helper, you see. And I didn't get quite that much money. So I worked there, and then I went to night school later on and studied pattern cutting. And then I worked when I came up here after I worked down there a couple of years, and I had quite a bit of experience. I came up here to Seattle, and there was nothing much to do, and I thought I went to the unemployment place, and I was going to get hired out to work for a farmer. So I decided to do that, and I got on the train, got up to this was up at Cedro Woolley. I got off the train, I looked, and there was a little sheet metal and plumbing shop. And I went in there and talked to him, and he hired me right away. So I went to work, kept my trade. I didn't want to be a farmer anyway. And so I got textbooks and started studying. And then things got slack and he didn't have any work for me. I came to Seattle and got another job here and worked in these shops around Seattle here. And then I went to night school and studied pattern cutting. And I got pretty good at it. And I got my journeyman's license, journeyman. I was a journeyman sheet metal worker. And I worked in different shops. Worked in a shop where they did a lot of warm air furnace duct work, and I worked in other shops. One job would give out, I'd get another job. And then went to night school and learned how to get the patterns out. So I was doing good as the average then, and worked as a sheet metal worker. And
Did you like
I
it?
kept studying. And I still got the textbooks. I had 3 or 4 textbooks on it. Some was on different parts of the work of the trade, because one shop would be a lot different than the next one if you went to. So, and before I got through school and everything, I was working some places I wasn't good enough. I hadn't learned enough about it. They'd lay me off, but I'd get another job, and then I'd go to school, and I could see where I'd find out why I didn't qualify on that, and I'd brush up on that part of the work too, read these books. I had a drawing board, and I could make patterns and learn and read those books. I was a pretty good sheet metal worker at the end there. I worked in Bremen Navy Yard, in the sheet metal shop over there in Bremen.
Well, what'd you do in your spare time when you weren't working and going to night school?
I met your grandmother.
Oh, really? How'd you meet her?
Yeah, I went to this dance. They were old Swedish dances, and
Where was it?
it was in Seattle there.
Uh-huh.
I went down there.
Why'd you go to a Swedish dance?
It was a Swedish dance, and he was there.
Why did you go to a Swedish dance?
I'd been there 2 or 3 different times, and funny thing about it, she went in the ladies' restroom, and she heard these girls say, "Al's here tonight. Al's here," and so I see her walking off. She wasn't looking at me, and I said, "That's the gal I'm going to date if I can." So I went up and said, "How about the dance?" And I wasn't